Okay, we are back for part 3 of Symbols and Artificial Intelligence here on TARTLEcast. And we want to start going through this actual paper and explain from the context of the authors of it where they're headed with their thinking and how this should be applied to artificial intelligence.
Yeah, and the article is Symbolic Behavior and Artificial Intelligence from DeepMind. This is what it says this. We suggest that AI research explore social and cultural engagement as a tool to develop the cognitive machinery necessary for symbolic behavior to emerge.
Yeah.
But I like the social and cultural engagement.
Well,
because they're trying to get the AI to capture that.
Well, that's what I'm talking about. Remember, we talked in the previous episode about the subjective nature of it.
Mm-hmm.
The reason they have come to that sort of understanding is because, and they stated this, that symbols are not a function of objective or intrinsic. They are subjective in interpretation of the viewer. And on top of that, symbols need an agreed upon link. That link, in my opinion, is cause and effect, but they think it's from a cultural standpoint. And that's why they want to look at that, which drives them to sort of that initial claim or statement of fact here in the article.
Yeah, and this is, they talk about symbols lie at the root of intelligent action. I love that statement. Symbols lie at the root of intelligent action. And you were talking about the definition of symbol.
Yeah. To go back to that definition, sim, S-Y-M, it comes from S-Y-N, which means together, and bol, B-O-L-E, is a throwing or a casting. So in the etymology of that, it's this Greek idea of bringing disparate things together and working with them to create an idea. And that creates that's the intelligent action, essentially, is the bringing of those things together to create a new sort of concept or understanding.
Yeah, and in this paper, they say our argument will center on the question. So this question is the whole basis of this white paper. How does a symbolic thinker behave if they interpret something as a symbol? And this is going to be a whole paragraph, so we're going to stop right there. How does a symbolic thinker...
Did you highlight that?
Behave.
I highlighted the same thing.
Yeah.
I didn't even know. Totally separate point. But yeah,
so if they interpret something as a symbol, so a symbolic thinker, which should be a human, or an AI.
Yep.
And we did an episode on that.
An elevated level of consciousness in itself.
Yes. How is it behaving? That's a key word. So how are we behaving based off of how we view the symbol?
Right. And so if when we look at that, how am I looking at it? If I look at a symbol and I'm emotionally charged, that may cause me to have a specific behavior. So now that's going to act as a data point. And that data point can then be ingested into this machine learning system and spit out some sort of output. Now, maybe I see a symbol and I have absolutely no idea what it means,
right.
No idea where it came from, and it has absolutely no effect on me. Now, what if you sit there, Jason, and you ask me, well, Alex, what does this mean to you? But I've never seen it before. Or the question is, how does this make you feel? Now it's getting into the very subjective stance of it. Before I have any other sort of experiential outside input from a cultural standpoint about what this symbol is actually representative of.
Yeah, and that's the problem is they're like, can we put these behaviors, can they be replicated in machines?
Right. But the thing is
the behavior part.
Is the behavior the correct way to look at it? Because the reason I say that is I can give you a behavior that is behavior that lacks any sort of behavior at all because I lack an understanding of how to interpret that symbol.
Yeah, you'd almost need tiers.
Behavior is like a couple steps past actually knowing.
You'd almost have you could almost have a knowing behavior scale. So they really relate to the symbol, they really understand it, they really know. And so that behavior is this. Then next tier would be they somewhat know about the symbol. They've had, mild experience with it. So that behavior is this. You see what I'm saying? Now you could define based off of familiarity, the behavior.
Right.
If that makes sense. And then you could tier that into AI and say, okay, level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of familiarity with behavior. Oh, okay. So the people, and then you could program that into AI. Now it has a reference point and a gauge or a spectrum
to stand off of
the behavior.
And then
if that makes sense. Sorry.
But that scale, right? And this is an important fact about all of our human nature. And even how we do, people do things in marketing.
Yeah.
Is the scale which way we define like a bucket, right? Or how we define, 12 inches as a foot.
Yes.
Is that really a foot? Because if then you start to look at the world mathematically in the sense of fractals,
right,
which means any space within its space is infinite within that space. You just keep dividing it down. So essentially it has an infinite distance. Well, then if I'm telling the AI to look at something behaviorally, subjectively, to say that this is 12 inches and I need you to root yourself in that, when we actually, as human beings, don't know that for a fact, is that the proper way to look at something then? Is behavior really the platform in the scale that symbols should be interpreted of their understanding off of?
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Do you see what I'm getting at here?
Yeah, no, I see what you're getting at. I think it's, as we're going to see in this paper, I think it's a complex question. And it's going to take years to figure this out. But listen to this. An intriguing aspect of our analysis is that the traits associated with symbolic behavior can be made thematically coherent if we reinterpret what symbols are and how they come to exist.
Right.
And we talked about the last 2 episodes, but they reinterpret. That word really got to me.
Yeah, we have an idea of what, and I'm holding up a coaster right here, and it has math on it. It has geometry. Well, I am saying that, okay, this coaster, how I interpret it as something beautiful. Are symbols strictly to be interpreted as something beautiful? Or are they to be interpreted as something that is mathematic? Are they interpreted to be as like geometry? I'm classifying this as geometry.
Yeah, but there's so many variants to that one symbol.
There's so many variants to that one symbol.
And then I guarantee you that symbol's been used in philosophy, it's been used in astronomy, it's been used in...
So then how could you then root your basis, which this paper is on, and this is where I'm going to contend with these other thinkers, that behavior, the subjectiveness of symbology, is the proper way, and the historical linkage of how we interpret symbols is the proper way to teach an AI system to look at symbols and understand them. I think that fundamentally, in a logical sense, is illogical and not a firm-rooted basis for us to begin to design off of. My contention, in my thought, in my logical understanding, is that if we are going to look at something, we have to make sure that it is 100% universal, baked into physics, baked into experience and laws of this universe, so that a line is a line regardless of where it is. The reason we chose the word TARTLE is because TARTLE means one thing, one place in the world. It is what it is. It stands alone.
Right.
It doesn't have a mixed interpretation depending on where it is used across the globe. That, for me, is a fundamental base to stand off of, because watermelon somewhere might mean something somewhere else completely different, positive or negative. So the root of this, when I think of how a symbol is defined, a symbol should strictly be rooted in a law of cause and effect. That allows it to objectively stand alone, and that seems like a firm platform for an artificial intelligence system to actually interpret those symbols.
So you're talking about using the law of cause and effect and then programming that law into the machine and then allowing it to judge these symbols based off of that.
Precisely correct. Because if you look at cause and effect, right?
You'd still have to look at behavior.
It defines
and then
equilibrium.
because the cause and effect would define the behavior.
That's exactly right. So when you look at behavior subjectiveness, that is not the primary thing that is actually driving the interpretation of a symbol. It's not its real meaning.
Yeah, you wouldn't say, follow me with this thought process. You wouldn't say based off of, okay, so we've had this flag for this country for 5,000 years, let's say, different variations of the flag, but same flag, the AI recognizes this. So this country and these people went to war with the flag. They start seeing all these pictures with the flag. They're putting all the puzzle pieces together. This AI is. Now it's saying those people in that region will go to war for that symbol. They will come together for that symbol, tribalism and all that. But when this AI begins to understand, and this is where I want to talk to you about, when this AI begins to understand and identify with a group of people. Do you see what I'm saying? Because TARTLE symbol will do that. Mm-hmm. As we build and as we grow, that symbol's going to identify you can't solve that part. And I think that's where I'm not necessarily pushing back. I'm asking a question. If you have just cause and effect as the answer,
yes,
and you filter everything with that, I'm not understanding. That's a good word. I'm not understanding how we could judge the effect. I get the cause. That's easy. The cause part is good.
Mm-hmm.
But how would you properly judge the effect? Because if I look at those people in Iceland, let's say, with that flag for 700 years, and I look at the cause and effect, and then I say, well, this symbol has to do with war, period. Mm-hmm. But I've judged that symbol based off of time and how the behavior of those group of people were around the symbol.
So you've essentially defined that symbol off of probability alone, because that's time,
right?
And I guess time and action.
So are you talking about the effect of that tribal group of people and what they're doing?
So now let me ask you something.
When you go cause and effect.
Say that tribal group wakes up one day with divine inspiration, and they say, we're never going to go to war, but they carry that same flag.
Yes.
What then happens to the machine learning model?
Right.
This is the same fundamental problem we have when we look in a subjective sense of defining who people are, rather than let them define for themselves.
Yes.
If you don't let something stand on its own and define itself through a law of cause and effect over so much time individually, then it's impossible for you to truthfully represent what the collective of those things actually means. And if you allow it to stand alone on something that is timeless and truthful, then I don't have to worry about the subjective representation of it. It means this here regardless everywhere. Gravity means the same thing to everyone everywhere.
Because, this is going to be such a hard task, because I'm thinking of how symbols change over time. And now you got to categorize that time frame from like 1620 to 1680. That symbol stood for this.
Yeah.
And then those group of people acted as this. And then, from 1900 to 1940, it meant this.
But Jason, there's no firmness in that, though. That's what I'm saying.
It's like because as you begin to categorize these symbols, I'm thinking as a machine. As you begin to categorize these symbols, as you begin to relate with as you begin to, because this is what machines love to do, to categorize us, to put us in buckets. So as you begin to do that based off of that symbol, because that's the symbol is what it's saying, we're telling it that's the priority.
Yeah.
So, and everything else filters off of that. So all this information you've collected from reading books, they're going to do matching, symbol here, symbol there. It's going to, and then it's going to say, oh, okay, well, what does that book say about that symbol on that page? I mean,
here we go.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Here we go, bro. You ready for this?
I'm still on effect though.
No, you're right. Let's think about that cause and effect. Let's talk about firmness, right?
Right.
In the idea that our current models like to put things in buckets, one or the other.
Yes.
I'm going to draw you a circle. Okay? Is the circle full in the inside or is it empty?
Now that depends on whether I resonate with the circle to the point of saying, do I identify this enough to put myself inside the circle, or will I stay on the outside and observe it?
But what did I just do? I forced you to focus only on the internal aspects of it. I didn't tell you to focus on the fact that a circle is a line connected at both points.
But by representing that symbol to me, you just put a responsibility on me for an action.
I did. I not?
And machines love that.
And then that forced you to think a specific way that otherwise you wouldn't have thought if I didn't give you some initial input. So then, essentially, the idea of how I implanted that verbal thought with my mouth into the visualization in your mind actually created a bias internally within you. Mm-hmm. So your thought actually didn't stand alone by itself at that point.
Right.
You now took out some sort of outside influence that was subjective to how I actually teed you up to that. Now, if you look at the circle by itself, a line connecting, it doesn't really matter if it's empty or full.
Right.
But the machine is requiring that sort of understanding because it's not rooting itself in the idea that a line connected only makes the symbol of a circle, and that's all it is a circle. And so the issue with that too is that a machine has to have one or the other. It lives in a world of binary. It's not in a quantum computing algorithm where it can actually take both states at the same time. Yes, the circle in a subjective stance is full and empty, right? But if I look at it from our current computational models, it has to be full or empty. So we are right now essentially limited in the ability for a computer to truthfully process something, and we're forced to be subjective because we cannot match the fundamental timeless idea of a circle just being a circle itself. The algorithms require a subjective input. So if we look at over time, this paper and the way they're describing this, we are driving ourselves into this idea of having to say a symbol is subjective, because linguistically, when we look at it, we are defining that as black and white, where our mind can actually look at it and say, in a mental image, that it is both at the same time.
Well, they said this in the article, and this is where they
Gosh,
said
I hope
that
makes sense.
they said that the symbol was the behavior of the symbol was an identity, but then they say symbols only exist with respect to an interpreter, and I was like,
that's the problem.
If the symbol stands on its own,
why does it?
It exists outside of itself.
Say Schroeder's cat. Is the cat dead or alive in the box? I don't know. There's a cat in the box though.
Right.
So only until I open it do I then decide whether or not it's alive or dead.
Right.
But when the box is closed, it's both at the same time. The cat can still stand alone in the universal sense.
But they said the symbol only exists with respect to interpreter. I was like, no, the symbol exists.
No, in the fact that they say it only exists because of someone interpreting
because they're basing everything off of behavior.
Is already a fundamental issue.
Right.
And then they're linguistically crippling themselves, and also a function of behavior, to say that behaviors are the primary platform we define a symbol off of, rather than allowing a symbol to stand for itself for what it really is.
Yeah, because now you're putting humanity first in the actions and the behavior of humanity, and you're putting the symbol. Now you've got to filter all of it down to the symbol instead of the symbol being at the top.
Yeah,
and you filter down through humanity.
Can we be clear? Geometry and math existed before the biological organism showed up.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you could see it.
Do you think Big Bang was like person first, then Big Bang, then symbol? No, it was Big Bang, no consciousness happening with a human being, no biological organism in its behavior interpretation. It was just math, structure, physics, and chemistry that were all occurring.
Yeah, and if I was going to get into quantum physics on this, what I would say is how symbols only exist with respect to an observer.
Yeah, now we're talking.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. And so if you're looking at it from only a sense of the symbol's existence from observation,
yes,
then you are essentially limiting also everything else in this world because I'm only observing.
Yes.
And then like the double slit experiment with the light photon, it changes depending on if the people are actually observing the experiment or not observing it.
Yes.
So now I'm having a quantum effect. And again, this is a problem with the computer and its own interpretation, right? It has to live in both states at the same time. But if you define it by both of those states, well, then does it become self-limiting in the real meaning of that symbol? Or do you allow the symbol to just be what it is? I allow the light photon to be what it is rather than say it is a particle or a wave.
Yeah, because they say it only exists with respect to an interpreter, and then they say the symbol meaning is independent of the properties of their substrate. So I'm saying...
How can it be independent of the property of the substrate? How can a symbol possibly be independent of itself?
Yes.
It is what it is. This is our problem, is that we continue to choose to define things into things they are not. This is a root of all the issues of how we interpret data in our world collectively. This is what causes our biases, our separation, war, religious fights, issues of police brutality, racism, all these separate things, these fundamental issues that we're looking at, is because we root it subjectively on human behavior and don't allow it to stand alone, and then look for the unifying aspects of things that stand alone. And understand we are all part of these standalone things.
Well, I mean, when you say symbol meaning is independent of the properties of the substrate, now you're going against biology. You know what I mean? Because you're looking at it in the sense of that symbol is an entity. So in it being an entity, which it is, and it stands alone on and of itself, now you're looking at it and you're saying symbol meaning is independent of the properties. No, it's all one. I mean,
and the paradox is solved.